I'm full offense. Welcome to my channel. Today, I want to talk about the most unique character in Genshin Impact, the Demon Slayer Chongyun. Before we get started with this guide, please be sure to like this video and leave a comment too. Liking and commenting helps my videos get pushed in the YouTube algorithm, and it would really mean a lot to me. Chongyun is a bit of a special snowflake, and I think he's very underrated for it. He can be an incredibly powerful sub DPS when used in the right team. He can also completely ruin the structure of other teams if used incorrectly. One of the main focuses of this video is learning which teams it's appropriate to build Chongyun in. Jumping into the video, we have Chongyun's artifacts. The main artifact set I recommend for Chongyun is the Noblesse Oblige 4 set. Chongyun's elemental burst is able to be used pretty frequently and is capable of doing a lot of damage. This makes Noblesse Oblige perfect for him. The other artifact set you could run on Chongyun is a split set of the Noblesse Oblige 2 set and the Blizzard Strayer 2 set. Here you're trading the party-wide attack buff for more cryo damage on Chongyun's elemental burst. I would only recommend this set if you're running the Noblesse Oblige 4 set on another character on your team. Chongyun's stats are pretty simple because you just want to build him for damage. Crit rate is going to be your main priority and you want to aim for 50 to 70%. After that is crit damage, and you want to try to have a 1 to 2 ratio on crit rate to crit damage, so try to be around 100 to 140% crit damage. Next is energy recharge, so he can cast his big damage burst and maintain the Noblesse Oblige buff. Then we have attack percent for more damage. Lastly is elemental mastery, which is mainly for triggering reverse melt on his elemental burst. For artifact main stats, we always have health on the flower and flat attack on the feather. For the sands, attack percent is the best stat here, but energy recharge could also work, and elemental mastery can be strong in melt teams. For Chongyun's goblet, you definitely want to have cryo damage. And for his crown, you're going to want crit rate or crit damage, depending on which you would benefit more from. Chongyun's elemental skill, Layered Frost, is where his main value as a sub DPS lies. When cast, Chongyun places an area on the ground, and any sword, polearm, or claymore wielding characters inside the area will receive a cryo weapon buff. This weapon buff changes the damage of basic attacks and charge attacks to cryo. Chongyun's second constellation also adds a 15% cooldown reduction effect to abilities cast in the circle, making it even stronger. Chongyun's elemental burst doesn't have as much functional value, but you shouldn't underestimate it. Cloud Parting Star is an incredibly powerful, nuke-style elemental burst. It's capable of doing a ton of damage, especially when triggering a melt reaction. Cloud Parting Star also registers as claymore damage, which allows it to shatter frozen targets and break geo structures. While at first glance, its scaling might seem low compared to other nuke-style bursts, keep in mind that it hits 3 times, and if you have Chongyun's 6th constellation, a 4th hit is added. For Chongyun's skills, you should prioritize upgrading his elemental skill as each level increases its duration. Upgrading his elemental burst is still important because of the damage output, but those levels increase in value in melt teams. And then his basic attacks low-key aren't that good. Due to the nature of Chongyun's elemental skill, I won't be covering any bow or catalyst using main DPS characters, as they naturally don't synergize with him. The first thing we should go over in the team section is which main DPS characters you should not pair Chongyun with. Eula is one of the big ones here. You might think, but fool, Eula is cryo, and Chongyun is cryo. That means cryo resonance. No, well, yes, but don't do that. Even though Eula is considered a cryo character, she primarily deals physical damage, and Chongyun is a character who makes your basic attacks no longer deal physical damage. This means that Chongyun strips Eula's basic attacks of any physical damage buffs that she might have, including her goblet. Next, we have Keqing and Razor. Both of these characters can be built for physical damage. Just like with Eula, Chongyun griefs any physical damage you want to deal, but even if you build them for electro damage, Chongyun still griefs them. In Genshin's element system, cryo always beats electro, and this is still true for weapon buffs. Chongyun's elemental skill's weapon buff will override any electro weapon buffs you may have. This strips away a huge amount of electro damage from Keqing and Razor. Beidou functions a little differently from Razor and Keqing, but don't run Chongyun with her either. Next we'll go over the types of DPS carries Chongyun does synergize with, starting with Pyro carries. Except here it's still complicated. The Luke and Hu Tao both function off of Pyro weapon buffs. Just like how Cryo overrides Electro, we have a similar issue here where Pyro overrides Cryo. This means that Chongyun can only benefit the Luke and Hu Tao when they are at their weakest. The prime candidate we have here is actually Bennett. Bennett doesn't function off of a weapon buff and instead has a very low cooldown on his elemental skill. He's able to consistently trigger melt reactions on his elemental skill every 2 seconds, which can pump out a ton of damage. If you're interested in this, I have a video about Bennett that goes very in depth, so be sure to check that out after this video. There's a link to it in the description below. Now, we'll go over cryo carries, which I think is where Chongyun really shines. Chongyun is currently the only cryo character with a weapon buff, and since he can give his weapon buff to other characters, this means he can give melee cryo carries even more cryo damage. This can be a huge damage increase for Kaya and Rosaria. Speaking of Kaya and Rosaria, my next video will be an in-depth guide to both of them. I'll cover main DPS and sub DPS playstyles in that video, so be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss it. That video should be uploaded next week, or if it's already next week, there will be a link to it in the description below. A reverse melt team with Kaya or Rosaria, Chongyun, and Xiangling can work well together if done correctly. You need to be careful with your cryo damage to make sure you're triggering melt on cryo attacks and not on Xiangling's pyro attacks. For the 4th slot, you could run a buff support, an animo support for their defense shredding, or a shielding character. I think Bennett, Jean, and Zhongli would be preferred for each of those roles respectively. Then we have freeze teams. I think this is where Chongyun is overall most useful. Kaya or Rosaria, Chongyun, and Xingqiu synergize extremely well together. They can trivialize almost all non-boss content in the game by permanently freezing enemies. For the 4th slot in the team, you would gain a lot of DPS from running an animo support. However, even though this is a perma-freeze team, sometimes you will find some brief downtime in the freeze setup, or enemies will be too spread out for you to freeze them all. Your health may slowly get chipped away at during these moments. Because of this, I think a healer or shielding character can be very valuable. I think that Jean is the best character to put in the 4th slot since she's an animo support who also brings healing, but other animo supports are still valuable. Venti, Kazuha, and Sucrose all have ways to suck enemies into Chongyun's elemental skill. Barbara can also be useful for extra hydro applications on top of her healing. Zhongli's shielding and defense shredding is always strong. Diona's shielding, healing, and extra cryo applications could also be useful here. All of these options work well, and a lot of it goes down to which characters you have and how comfortable you are with the playstyle of the team. Also, Xingqiu could be swapped for Mona if you have and prefer her. There's one last thing to cover about freeze teams, but it gets a bit hypothetical. That would be a freeze team with a hydro carry. We only have 4 hydro characters in the game right now. 2 are catalyst users, and 1 is a bow user who I would die for. The last one is a sword user, but he isn't much of a main DPS. Hypothetically, there could be a character released in the future who is a hydro DPS carry who doesn't function off of a weapon buff and has a very low cooldown on their elemental skill. Such a character could function well with Chongyun, but even with all that, I doubt they would be able to outperform Kaya or Rosaria in this role. Now that we understand when, where, and why to use Chongyun, let's learn which weapons to use on him. I won't spend too much time here, and I'll just cover a few notable weapons of both 4-star and 5-star rarity. Wolf's Gravestone is going to be the best weapon to use on Chongyun. It's an absurdly strong weapon that grants huge damage numbers to anyone who wields it. The next best weapon for Chongyun is actually the 4-star Serpent Spine from the Battle Pass. Due to the quick-swap nature of Chongyun's playstyle, you can comfortably maintain the attack bonus stacks the weapon gives. This weapon also has scaling crit rate, so with it, your Chongyun will always have a good chance to crit on his elemental burst. Then we have the Skyward Pride. This weapon has scaling energy recharge and an effect that increases all damage and sends out a damage wave when Chongyun uses his skill or burst. Back to the 4 stars, we have the Lithic Blade, which is very strong when used correctly. This claymore has scaling attack percent, and a stacking effect that increases attack and crit rate based on how many leeway characters are on the team. Chongyun always contributes 1 stack, and you will most likely run him with Xingqiu or Xiangling for a 2nd stack. The last weapon I'll mention is the Prototype Archaic. This claymore isn't necessarily next in the weapon hierarchy, but since it's a crafted weapon, it's a completely free-to-play option. This weapon has scaling attack percent and still functions very well on Chongyun. This concludes my guide on Chongyun. I hope everyone who watched this video understands how Chongyun works a bit better now. He really is the most unique character in Genshin Impact. Like I mentioned earlier, my next video will be an in-depth guide to Kaya and Rosaria. That video will partially be a follow-up to this one. I'll be going into more detail on how to play the freeze comps I covered in this video. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and leave a comment if I missed anything or if you want to give me any feedback. I'll be reading and interacting with my comment section regularly. I also stream Genshin Impact every Saturday evening on Twitch. Come stop by and say hi at twitch.tv/fulloffense. I have a Discord server that I interact quite a bit with as well. Everyone is welcome, so come leave feedback and meet other Genshin players who want to learn more in-depth character building. There are links to both of those in the description below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you all next time with an in-depth guide to Kaya and Rosaria.